Welcome to Vyper for Beginners. In this series, we will learn how to write smart contracts in Vyper, starting from the basics and then ramping up in difficulty. I recommend you follow along, but if you just want to sit and watch, that's fine. I've got a GitHub over here that I'll have a link in the description, where after each lesson, you can go to the lesson folder and then head over to the exercises where you can practice your new knowledge and build skills. Remember, it doesn't matter how many hours of videos you've watched, it matters what sticks. And only by hand-on practice will you actually improve your skills. All right, so for lesson 1, we're going to cover variables and functions. More specifically, what we're going to touch upon is integers and strings, a constructor, which is a special type of function, decorators for function visibility, and write up a basic function. And we're all going to do this by writing up the smart contract. Real quick, if you don't know what Vyper is, it's a programming language to create smart contracts. It's Pythonic. This is what it looks like. You know, it's designed to be easy readable with minimal complexity, and again, Pythonic. So you can probably see from the syntax here, it looks extremely similar to Python with some differences, among others, how you define a variable. Now, I will be working with ApeWorks, which is a Python dev tool. If you want to know how to set up your dev environment, I've got a separate video for that. For this part, we're focusing on Vyper, but Ape picks up the code, compiles it, and then deploys it on a live blockchain or a local blockchain. All right, I'm gonna head over to my terminal, and over here, I've already set up my dev environment. Again, I've got a separate video if you want to see how to do that. I'm gonna navigate to my Ape folder where my Ape dev environment is, and over here, and then I'm gonna open my code editor. I'm gonna come to my contracts folder, create new file, and I'm gonna call this hello.vy. And over here, we're gonna start writing our smart contract. First thing that we're going to do is define the version of Vyper that we're gonna use. For this one, I'm gonna use version number 0.3.0, and this sign means up to version 0.3.0. Go ahead, enter, cool. Let's take a look at the final contract that we will be building, and then we'll build it together step by step. So in this contract, we're going to define a bunch of variables, in this case, a number, an integer, and a string. We're going to define the visibility of our function. We're going to build a constructor and build a function to set a new greeting for our variable greet and change the number for our variable number. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything so we can do this step by step. Okay, let's first take a look at variables. So a variable is defined in Vyper by giving it a name, giving it a visibility, and then typing the variable. So for integers, which are numbers, we type it with uint256. So uint means unassigned integer. For integers, we can be more specific on how large the value of a variable can be. And over here, you can see different types of integer types that we can cast, and then the value they can carry. Now, the numbers behind int stand for bits. So int 128 means that this value can carry 128 bits. Uint 8 means 8 bits. Uint 256 means 256 bits. Now, the difference between an int and a uint, you might see over here, is that an int, an integer, can have negative values. A uint, an unassigned integer, cannot have negative values. So you can already see that if inside our smart contract, we do not want the value of a variable to be negative, we will assign the data type uint. And if we want our variable to carry a large number, we don't want to use something like uint 8, but uint 256. Now in practice at the start, you will just use uint 256, as this can be a lot to take in. So we'll just use uint 256 for our smart contract. So let's head over to our smart contract and type our first variable, which is my number, public, cast it with uint 256. Now public here means that everyone can see this variable. Remember, everything on the blockchain is public. When we define our variables, we can decide two data types, public and private for Vyper. Public means everyone can see it, and then Vyper automatically creates a function, and then there are two visibilities that we can give our variable, public and private. Public means everyone can see it. Private means only our smart contract can access and see that variable. Variables can be public or private. Public variables can be seen by anyone on the blockchain. So when we deploy a smart contract, someone will be able to see my number and the value, but private variables can only be seen by the contract itself. For now, most of the time, we're going to use public, and we'll dive into private later. Next, let's dive into strings. So a string is a variable type that's defined the same way by giving it a name, a visibility, and then the data type string, but you see some additional stuff over here. And that is because for strings in Vyper, we need to tell Vyper how many characters a string has. We do that by having these square brackets and then passing a number. So this string can have 100 characters. So over here, I can define greet with a visibility of public, find it as string, and then between brackets, we'll type 100. Next, let's talk about constructors. A constructor is a special function that only executes once, and that is when we deploy our smart contract. It is always defined in the following way, and you might recognize it from the initializing function of a Python class. Now we will also need to give a visibility to our Vyper functions. Over here you can see external. There are two types of visibilities inside Vyper. There are internal functions and external functions. Simply put, internal functions are only available within a contract and can only be called inside a contract and cannot be called through a transaction outside a contract, but inside. And external functions are called by accounts or contracts through a transaction by anyone. Now, this may seem a little bit abstract at this point, but later on in practice, we'll see how to use internal and external functions. For now, we're going to focus on external functions. Now, let's go back to our contract and define a constructor. Now, constructors can be used for different purposes, like when we deploy the smart contract, we might want to set the owner of the smart contract or transfer a certain balance. And we'll get to all of that later on. Right now, what we're going to do is set the value of our variable greet to hello world. We can work with the variable defined in our contract like this. Self refers to the contract. And again, you might recognize this from a Python class. Then we pass the variable name that we've defined over here, and then its value. Now remember, we need to give a visibility. So we can do that with a decorator external like this. Awesome. Now we're going to write up two functions, one to change the value of greet and two to change the value of my number. Defining a function in Vyper is pretty much the same as Python. And over here, you can see the same rules apply for constructor as a normal function. We need to give it a visibility over here. We define it by using the def keyword. So over here, you can see how we define parameters. And we use these parameters to take input in our function and set the value of, in this case, any variable. And over here, you probably see, now in this piece of code, there's actually something wrong on this line. Can you see it? This is supposed to be self.myNumber. All right, let's go back to our contract and write up a function to change the value of my number. Inside my smart contract, I'm going to define the visibility first. Then I'm going to go ahead and give my function a name, call it change number. And then we need to pass a parameter, pass an argument. Let's call it underscore num. And we want to type it uint 256. Now I want to access the variable my number and change its value to whatever I pass to num. Save it. That's it. Next, we're going to define a function to change the variable of greet. So defining a function is pretty much the same, but how we deal with string as a parameter is slightly different. So over here, you can see the square brackets again. So when we define a parameter of the type string, just like with defining a variable, we're going to need to make sure that we tell our function that this parameter has 100 characters. And again, on this line, you can see a mistake. You know what it is? Seems like a Dora game by now. If you have kids, you know what Dora is. So over here, we need the self keyword that is missing. All right, let's go back to our smart contract. Find the function visibility, give my function a name, change greet, underscore greet as a name from a parameter. And then I define a string or pass it as a string, an amount of characters, self.greet, and change the value to whatever we pass to greet. Save it. Awesome. We've written up our first smart contract. But now we need to compile it and deploy. Remember, you can do this in something like as an online editor in Remix, but I've built a local UI that I'm going to use. The first thing that I'm going to do is head over to my site nav and generate a new file called .env for my environment variables. I will copy everything in here, paste it, and then next I need to grab my private key. I'm going to head over to my terminal. Inside my terminal, I'm going to run Anvil, my local blockchain, scroll up, grab the private key, paste it, save it. Next, I'm going to open up another terminal, check if I'm in the right directory. I am. And then I'm going to create a virtual environment called myv. Next, I'm going to activate my virtual environment. And then I'm going to install all the requirements. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and clear my terminal. And after it's done installing, I'm going to navigate to my ape folder and run the command ape run scripts, deploy anvil.py. That's my Anvil deploy script, -- network localhost on port 8545. And again, if you want to see how I set up my local dev environment and you can want to spin up your local UI, check out the previous video. Right, we'll pick our contract, sign the transaction with our account, and this will spin up a local UI where we can interact with our contract. So over here, I can see the value of my number. Vyper initializes an empty variable with 0. And function greet, we said hello world. So if I change the number to 5, here's a transaction. If I scroll down and execute my number, I see 5. And then if I change the message of greet to Vyper is awesome, here's a transaction. If I scroll down and check my new greet message, indeed it's changed to Vyper is awesome. And that completes lesson 1. We've gone through what variables and integers are. We've looked at the constructor, which is a special function that only executes once we deploy our smart contract. We looked at internal and external visibility through decorators for our functions, and we've written a basic function. Pat yourself on the back if you coded along. If not, go to the exercises folder in the GitHub repo and start practicing your skills. See you guys in the next lesson.